Hi, everybody. Welcome to This and That, where everybody has a story today to tell. And today's story comes from Thom from printmymini.com. The first question of the day, as always, is hi, Thom. And what makes you a geek?
I guess in this case, the fact that I love 3D printing and tabletop games so much, I guess that's my geekiness right there.
All right. What kind of games do you play? What tabletop games do you?
Currently, I'm really still just into D&D. I mean, I do a little Pathfinder.
Okay.
Some of my friends and other companions have been trying to get me into Warhammer, and I haven't quite delved into that one yet. But there's so much to it that it's such a cool story concept, but I don't necessarily want to dig into that while I'm already playing so many other things. I try to do the DMing as well when I do D&D, so it takes quite a lot of energy and effort to kind of go through everything you want to put together on those kinds of campaigns. So at the end of the day, you're like, I'm done. I'm going to go paint some stuff instead.
I love it. So tell us about Print My Mini. I went to the website, I checked it out, and the link is going to be right here for you guys to go check it out
Okay.
as well. But tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
what you do.
Print My Mini essentially started as just a small 3D printing service. We were essentially wanting to offer our services to the local South Florida crowd. There are plenty of 3D printers down here, but when you look at the guys that are offering as far as quality, there wasn't always consistent. We do a lot of very high quality. We do resin only printing, so it's perfect for tabletop miniatures and stuff that has a high amount of detail. I have a very small printing farm. We've got about 5 active printers that are currently always churning something out. And we also do a lot of pre support work, which, if you're not familiar with that, essentially it would be where someone gives us a file and then that file needs to be supported so the printing process can work. So then I would take that into the slicer program and we would apply the supports, send that file back to the customer, and then the customer would do either the printing themselves or in some cases they send it out to their own customers and then their customers do the printing on their own because there's a big call for that too. I mean, you've got folks like us who do it for other people, and then you have folks that just want to print their own thing because it's so convenient to have the ability to make multiples of something rather than having to buy I need a skeleton, so I've got to buy 5 skeletons. Instead, I just buy one file and now I can replicate that skeleton as many times as I want. So it really becomes indefinitely cheaper. And so people even like it, buying from us because, once you come to us and you say, okay, I need some minis, I'm like, all right, well, we have most of them, we're essentially offering whatever you buy. So if you have one, you hook up with us. Once you buy, I think it's like 5, you start to get like free ones anyway because we throw in a nice little discount. So I try to make it cost effective even for the people that are buying physical prints and stuff like that. But that's essentially it. 3D printing mixed with our love of tabletop games. I think that's pretty much where we went.
Okay, so I want to understand because see, I even though I do play board games, I don't own a 3D printer. I looked into it and it was like a whole world that I thought, okay, so I
Oh
want
yeah,
to.
yeah. It's
Yeah. I want to understand if someone goes to your page, what is the process from having an idea of I want this mini to getting it, to getting it done? What does the process look like if you're going to be doing, uh, let's say there's somebody who has an idea, how do they give that idea to you? Do they need
fair
photos?
enough. Yeah.
And then all the way to the end
Um,
of the process.
That's a great question. In most cases, we usually will get folks that have a fairly decent idea of what they want. So all I ask is either some sort of a concept, either a drawing, maybe even some. You can even pull some artwork off the internet or use an AI engine if you want to generate an image and just send that to us and say this is kind of what I want the character to look like. There's a
Mhm.
couple of options people can go for that, and I'll tell folks this: you can use a system called Hero Forge, where you can actually go there, customize a character completely from start to finish. You can even put colors on them if you want to specify. And then at the end of the process, you get the file that you can print. And then if you don't have a printer, you can obviously send it to a printer company like us. And we do plenty of Hero Forge stuff. There's a couple of other companies that do very similar things. like that. But otherwise, if you have, let's say, a drawing or a concept or even just a rough idea, we can help you get it the rest of the way. We'll either, finish the concept sketch for you, like we'll work with you to try to design something that's going to, be like the character you're trying to create, or we'll use AI sometimes to create some concepts, and then we'll go from there. Because I mean, AI is it's cheap and easy. I mean, I won't lie, it's not as good as having an artist, but it is definitely a cheaper way to do it, just to give us some ideas. And then what I do is I'll send that over to my 3D modeler who's in Spain, who does some very fantastic work. He's my in-house modeler. And then we have a bunch of artists that we get models from every month, but he's my in-house guy. He does a lot of my actual bread and butter. Like if I'm making custom models, he's the one I go to. He'll take a look at the sketches and he gives me an idea of how much time it's going to take. He's going to say, okay, this is pretty simple, so it's maybe a 25-day sculpt. And then we'll price it accordingly to the time that it's going to take. And then the customer will get a quote from us saying, your mini is going to take this much time and it's going to cost this much to sculpt. And if they're okay with that, we move ahead with it. We start the sculpting process. And then once I get the sculpt file back, we'll probably go through a couple revisions where folks can say, I don't like this, or maybe you could put the sword on his back, or whatever the case may be. Finally, we get to a finished result. And then at that point, I'll go ahead and start printing the prototype pieces. We usually print like 1 or 2 prototypes before I do the finished model to make sure that there's no real huge imperfections or defects in the actual print. Because that's one thing you can run into when you do 3D printing. They don't always come out 100% the same. You're always going to have a little bit of a subtle difference between each deviation of the print. It's kind of weird. I can't really explain it. It's got a lot to do with just the nature of how 3D prints work. You'll get a small defect in one, but you won't get it in the other. And so eventually we'll get a really good one. And then once we get to that level, we'll print the master copy, and then that goes off to the customer. And hopefully they're satisfied with that. And as much as that process sounds like super expensive, it's actually not, because we can custom design like minis about this size, that's like your typical tabletop right there, very small. That would cost maybe $25 to make a sculpt of, and the printing process is an extra $15 on top of that. So it's not super expensive, and then you have a fully customized miniature. Now, of course, painting and everything else, if that goes on top, then we add things up together as it goes along. But for the most part, I still try to keep things very cheap and affordable, because I know that not everybody has tons of money to spend on this kind of stuff. I mean, it is essentially for a tabletop game, and albeit, it's still kind of a niche thing. So one of the other things we do a lot of print for either practicality, like we'll print functional parts like boxes and things like that people want to use, or like this piece, for example, that I showed you earlier. This isn't this wouldn't be a tabletop piece. This would be like a display piece. Right. So in most cases, somebody would order something like that, and they'd want that painted, and they'd want that, for display. That's not something you're going to put on the table. Right. So those kinds of pieces, they do cost a little bit more when you're talking about that. But that's kind of our side stuff. The bread and butter really comes from the miniatures for tabletop. And I'll be honest, a lot of people like to paint them themselves. So they'll just order a bunch of minis from us. They'll take them and they'll go paint them. So it's fun, though, to see what people will come up with sometimes with the custom models, for sure.
I mean, I was looking at some of the stuff that you have in the website and the prices, and yes, you're right. It's I was expecting a bigger price range than what I saw, so it's really good. And I know that, like you mentioned, it differs once you have the painting on top of it. But let's talk a little bit about painting, because I know a lot of our viewers do enjoy when I have painted minis on the table. They really like that. So tell me a little bit about what you do and how you do it.
As far as our painting techniques, I mean, I've got a couple actual videos we've posted on our YouTube channel where I do kind of go over some of the techniques that I use. But essentially, we paint with a lot of I use a lot of acrylic paint. I use a lot of washes, especially since minis are small. Washes are effective because they'll coat a decent amount of the model, and you'll get like these deep, dark tones in your recesses, and you'll get these lighter tones where the wash kind of falls away from the peaks of the object. Whereas in like classic technique painting, you would have to go in and paint in your layers of glazes over the, the highlights to make sure that they show up. Using a wash system or something like that, you're saving yourself time. So what you want to do is you'd want to prime the figure in black first, and then you're going to either apply a airbrush, either gray or white, over the top, like a zenithal prime, like you would do for like Warhammer figures. And then you're going to want to get either a very watered down paint, like a glaze, like an acrylic paint with probably 50-50 to water to paint ratio. And you're going to want to mix that up nice and light, and that will go over. But what you'll notice as you paint over is that you're going to get those shadows where you put your black are still going to stay, but the high points where the white paint has been able to reach, you're going to see the highlights will be automatic. So that underpainting technique is going to give you so much more depth on your miniatures than you had before. That's a really great technique. Some folks call that a slap chop, zenithal prime, and there's a lot of names for it. But essentially that black to white gradient there in the beginning, that underpainting. You can even use paints like, I don't know if you're familiar with Army Painter makes a paint called Speed Paint. They are fantastic. I don't necessarily use them the way that they're intended because I think they just intend you to paint them over white. But we use this kind of like black and gray combination, and we'll use the speed paints over that. And what I've noticed is it creates a really kind of like dull contrast of color between like the very dark and the very light. And then all I have to do is go in later with a nice dry brush and apply my highlights, and they look gorgeous. So, I mean, it'll look like you spent 5 or 6 hours on it, but honestly, you could pop them out in about an hour. So it's a good way to do them. But that underpainting technique is key. If you get those shadows in there, it's going to have way more depth than it had before. It's a really good way to do it.
Wow, that's super great tip. Thank you so much for that. Now, I know you mentioned you had some, I know you mentioned you have some interesting requests. So tell us about some of those interesting requests as far as 3D printing goes.
Well, some of them aren't PG-13, but we won't talk about those.
Okay.
I usually when I go to conventions, this is when I get the strangest requests. I've had people come up to me. We sell a lot of Mario and Princess Peach and Luigi's and stuff like that. So one time I brought out at the Sunrise Show, actually, we had bullet bills, and people were laughing because they said, "Well, the bullet bills." Well, somebody actually said to me, they said, "Oh, you should do the bullets from Roger Rabbit." And I said, that's a good one because I said, that cartoon gun that he had each one had a different personality and each bullet was different. He never did actually come back to me and order them, but it was an idea. And I said, oh, maybe I'll make them myself. We've had all kinds of other ones too. I mean, I've had somebody ask me to make weird kind of like furry animals and like creatures that just don't exist. Or some lady had me make a hamster for her that she now wears apparently on her headpiece when she goes to conventions. So, I mean, we get some interesting ones. We also get some characters that don't exist or haven't been made into figurines, and I think that's one of the bigger ones. We did a custom piece for, I don't know if you're familiar, there's an old movie called Wizards. It's an old animation. There was a character in it called Eleanor. She's a fairy princess. That was a custom piece. So that was an interesting one because, I mean, I remember that movie from my childhood, but I was like, okay, sure. I mean, I didn't even, in my head, I'm thinking, wow, I'm surprised anybody else even knows about this film. So that was a fun one. We've done all sorts of stuff. I mean, everything from video game characters to model cars, even. I mean, I have a guy out in California that's ordered about 6 or 7 model cars. He says that they're ones that he can't find anywhere else. So I guess it's cheap. I guess it's cheap enough that he can hire somebody to model them. He then sends me all the parts, and then I print them out. I send them back to him. He was good with that for a while. I haven't heard from him in a bit, but he was ordering quite a lot of model cars. So yeah, it can be interesting, and it can also be very dull. I mean, I printed the most boring things. I think there was not what is a hinge. It was like a type of bracket, almost that goes around shelving to keep them connected. Some custom type of shelf. I printed out, I think maybe 12 of those. So that was a pretty boring one, to be honest. But I mean, not everything's going to be exciting.
Of course, you do it what the people want.
Exactly.
You mentioned you had some interesting requests at cons. Tell me about some cons or events that you've been at that maybe you've been able to see a lot of pull towards what you sell, what you have.
That's an interesting thought concept. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you this. We started doing. I hadn't done cons until last year. We did our first con was in UltraCon, which was West Palm Beach.
Hmm.
Fantastic show, very receptive to what we did. There were a few other folks in our area that were doing 3D printing. They have your normal guys that make the articulated dragons and helmets and stuff like that, and that's pretty common. And I met
Hmm.
another guy who was doing Pokemon, and he was using completely clear materials for everything. And then I met a bunch of other folks that were just really interested in the kind of the way we did things because everyone came up to the booth and they were like just flabbergasted by the quality of the material. And it's really to be seen in person. And a lot of people who do come up to our booth, they'll say, "Oh my God, can I touch it?" That's always the question I get. Can I touch it? Because I guess a lot of people, they see 3D prints, they're not smooth. They're usually rough. They have a very rough exterior. You can see heavy layer lines. Our stuff doesn't look like that. So when people see it, they're often like, "Oh my goodness, can I touch it?" So I kind of laugh a little bit now because that's always the thing. So I've now taken to actually putting a sign on the table that says, "Yes, you can touch it." So
Okay.
people don't even have to ask if they're paying attention. Like, "Oh, can I? Oh, I can touch it. Okay." And I get a kick out of it. But as far as that, I really do like the reception we get at the shows. It's a lot of fun to hear people kind of ask us questions about, how does it work? How is the like you said before? How does the process work? How do I get something that's in my head to the printer? And I'm like, it's multi steps, but obviously we can get there with pretty much anything.
Right.
Um, but it's been fun, and I think the reception is actually growing because the last show we just did in Orlando, we it was probably one of our best shows yet, and the reception was great. People were super enthusiastic. They loved the idea of being able to make custom work.
Right.
They love the idea of having, it's because it takes it from like, oh, I have a collectible to I have a unique collectible that's mine that I came up with myself.
Definitely.
um, you know, and I think that makes a huge difference. I'm working on one right now in kind of in the, I want to say quoting phase with the gentleman that's working on it, but it's from the anime Bleach, and it's a character that I could not find any figures for it. I could not find any files for it, nothing. And so he was like, "I really want this." I said, "Okay." So I've been talking to my modeler. We're trying to get this character made up for him. So that's the kind of thing I really enjoy, and that only happens at these cons. I don't meet these people otherwise. That's our people. Those are the people that really, would be willing to pay the kind of money to make a custom full piece like that. And I love that kind of stuff. It's fantastic.
Of course. Yeah, that's one of the things that when I saw your work is we met at the Sunrise Comic Con, the local Comic
Correct.
Con
Yeah.
down here, and I saw your work and I'm like, wow, this is it's something that I remember trying to even find a 3D printer, and then when I started reading, I'm like, okay, no, we're not doing this. So to see somebody that does it and does it well, I was immediately attracted to this. I know you wanted to feature a few of items that you've been working on,
Oh,
and some new
yeah.
materials and stuff. So let's do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Commonly, we work with a material that it's actually made by the manufacturer who makes my printer. It's Anycubic is the company we work with. So they make a type of resin that's called Craftsman material. Up until now, I was convinced this stuff was just the best stuff I could get my hands on for the printers that I was using. And recently, we got contacted by a company, and they're not sponsoring us or anything. I mean, they sent me a couple free samples, but they're new. And so I think their thing was they're trying to get somebody, even if I'm a smaller influencer, because we got a little YouTube channel going on. They're like, well, maybe if I can get some of these guys to talk about this material, it might get a bit more attention. And I'm not the only one that's talking about it, but some of the other folks in the community have actually had some issues with some of the residents. So I think some of the videos I'm going to publish in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to kind of try to clear the air and explain why the material is better. And I think, sadly, unfortunately, some of these guys just don't know what they're doing in some cases. So, and I'm not naming anybody specifically, but it's very hard to see the detail on this camera. But I am going to send you some video and stuff so you can get a better look. I'm going to put these guys on their stands, but if the camera tries to focus on them, you can tell. Now, normally the resin we use is like a gray material, and these two materials are actually like almost like an orange and a brown.
Mm-hmm.
And this is more of what you would consider like display quality. The other stuff we're using is considered display quality, but we've almost taken it to the point where we're using our 4K and 8K printers, and we're printing on material that honestly is just, it's way beyond anything I've used before. So the new material that we've got that we're currently testing right now with this company, more than likely is probably going to become my staple material on some of
Okay.
my higher end stuff, only because of the fact that it's just that good. And like I said, I'm going to supply you with some good video, roundtable shots and stuff like that of all these, so that way you get some good shots for this particular segment, because it's hard to see it on this camera. You don't get the best view of them.
Right.
But it's very highly detailed stuff. It looks really good. For anybody who's looking for collectibles, this material is definitely going to be it, and it's something that we're going to be featuring on our channel a bit too. So I'm going to be talking about it in the next couple of weeks, if not, or sooner, because I'm working on a video later tonight. So we'll see how that goes.
Before I forget, because I know I was going to ask you before, and then we started talking about something else. Where can we find you on YouTube? What is the name of the channel?
Oh, it's right on my thing on the bottom there. I print 3D minis. I don't know if it shows up on your side, but
Okay.
yeah, I print 3D minis is the channel. We do tutorials on 3D printing. I do painting tutorials. We do finishing tutorials, like how to seam, gap seaming, sanding techniques. I did a couple reviews on different resins. I've got a couple different segments on there, mostly educational, because most of it was kind of aimed at, when I started doing this, there was very little in the way of teaching people how to do it. And it's still kind of slim pickings when it comes to what you're actually getting out of the learning material. They may not be teaching you the best material. I mean, I literally watched a video the other day where somebody was trashing a particular material, supposedly knew what he was talking about, but did not actually apply the right settings to what he was supposed to. So essentially, he was doing it wrong and telling people that it was wrong. So it kind of bothers me sometimes. There's some miseducation. But we initially, my purpose was to really get into this, to show people, number one, yes, it's confusing and a little bit complicated, but it is totally achievable. You can get great results with it. But I also put out a lot of caveats and warnings, like you got to have the environment for it. You got to have the space for it. You know, you need to understand these chemicals do have a smell, and you probably should have an air filter, because some people don't like that. And so in those cases, I usually recommend that those folks get into FDM printing, which is a little different. It actually works differently than the technology that we use for resin printing. But again, there are pros and cons to both. Like I've said, the quality and the smoothness of our material is what makes it look good, whereas FDM can produce really big parts. So, I mean, if you're interested in doing like cosplay stuff, FDM is the way to go. If you're interested in board game and tabletop stuff, resin printing is the way to go. But yeah, but if you check out our channel, we do have a lot of painting tutorials. You were asking about that too. That whole technique I was going over, that's literally, I think, described in several of those videos as well. So might give you a better idea of what I was talking about too, to see it actually done in action.
That's perfect. Well, Tom, that's a lot of information. But before we go, I want to ask you the questions that I ask every guest that comes to the podcast. So the first one is, what's your favorite movie?
Oh, gosh. Honestly, the original Ghostbusters.
Oh, did you watch the new one that just came out with the original?
I did. I just saw it on Easter Sunday. Yep, I just saw that.
Man, what did you think?
I like them. I think the new well, they're not really remakes. I think the new sequels are good. I think they did a good job, kind of making it inherit the history of the older films. It's a hard thing to do with a film that's that old.
Right. Yes, very, very true. I also watched it, and because I obviously growing up with the original one, I wanted to see the old crew back. It's like so interesting that it
was cool.
It was cool. It reminded me a little bit of what they did with Star Wars. Like, so you can tell I'm a big Star Wars fan.
Yes, exactly.
they brought the old people, but they're introducing new people, and now we can move forward without the old crew. So I thought that was very smart. And I found the characters likable, the new characters, right?
Yeah, I did like the new characters. I thought they were good. The
Yeah.
nice concepts overall. It was a very fun movie. Kids
Mhm.
enjoyed it too, so I mean that's a plus.
Right. Yes. Awesome. All right. So next one. What's your favorite song?
Probably one from my wedding, "Yellow" by Coldplay.
Coldplay. Okay. Sure. Okay. That's a good one. Coldplay is, they have a lot of good songs. I like that song too. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
last question, because this podcast is sponsored by Meeple Village, which is a board game channel. So, what is your favorite board game?
right. I mean, I don't know if it counts, but I mean, technically the only board game I think we play is D&D. But I mean, if you're counting board games, my kids and I play Life a lot. So
Okay. I mean, I think both of those count. I know that D&D is more of an RPG, but you still play it
yeah,
at the table,
still
right?
playing on the table on a board, right? So I mean,
Right. Right.
it's a
Yeah.
board game
And,
technically.
and hopefully, you have really cool minis from printmymini.com.
Yeah, I do. I throw out some of the worst ones too, and my family hates me for it because, like I said, I do the DMing. So they're like, "Tom, what'd you do that for?" I'm like, "Well, why not?"
Because you can. Well,
That's
thank
right.
you so much for joining us today. It was
Thank
lovely
you for
talking
having
to
me.
you, and thank you for all the information. This was great. I mean, I know I learned a lot. I'm sure that my viewers learned a
Awesome.
lot. So it was great having you. Yeah, and may you play more games.
Thank you.